Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling, well, a really profound paradox from history. It's the story of Jesus of Nazareth,
Hmm.
born among his own people, the Jews, the chosen people, but then largely rejected by them.
Right.
And yet, his message finds this incredible resonance with Gentiles, people outside that covenant, who then amazingly become the first to spread his teachings worldwide.
It's a fascinating dynamic, absolutely.
So our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack why that happened. How did it shape, 2,000 years of theology, history, interfaith relations?
Yeah.
We want to shine a light on the ancient hopes for a Messiah, what Jesus' ministry was actually like, the splits within the Jewish community.
Which is a key point often missed.
Definitely. And why Gentiles were so receptive and what it all means for both faiths, even today.
And the source material we're drawing on is, well, it's quite rich. It gives us a lot of historical, theological, and social context to work with for this complex story.
Okay, great. So let's start at the beginning with the Jewish people's hope for a Messiah. What were they actually expecting? What did that figure look like in their minds?
Well, for centuries, there was this deeply ingrained hope rooted in prophecy
Yeah.
for a Messiah from King David's line.
Okay.
And this wasn't just a spiritual guide. They expected a king, a triumphant leader who'd restore Israel's independence, rule justly.
And kick out the Romans, presumably.
Critically, yes.
Yeah.
Overthrow foreign oppressors. That hope was intensely political, especially living under Roman rule. It was about liberation, national pride.
Right, a very tangible political expectation. So given that backdrop, how did Jesus, his whole approach, this kingdom not of this world, how did that actually land? Was it confusing? Offensive?
Well, it's fascinating because his life and his message seem to directly contradict those expectations.
In what way?
Look at his background. Humble birth, a carpenter's son, his inner circle, fishermen, tax collectors, marginalized people.
Not exactly assembling a royal court or an army.
Exactly. Instead of rallying troops, he's preaching about a spiritual kingdom. He explicitly says, "My kingdom is not of this world."
John 18.36. Right.
That's the one. And this created a real problem for many. How could this man, teaching forgiveness, humility, love your enemies, even submitting to death on a cross, how could he be the mighty conqueror they were waiting for?
Yeah, that's a huge disconnect.
It really was. The whole idea of a crucified Messiah, a suffering servant instead of a conquering king,
Right.
that was a major, major stumbling block. A deep disappointment for many who expected political liberation.
So it wasn't just that his message was different. His actions often put him directly at odds with the religious establishment, right? The Pharisees, the Sadducees. How did he challenge them?
Oh, absolutely. He consistently emphasized the spirit of the law
Right.
over just the strict letter. He healed on the Sabbath,
Big no-no for some.
a huge one. He forgave sins, which was seen as God's prerogative alone. He welcomed outcasts. These actions directly challenged their authority and traditions.
Can you give an example from the source?
Sure. John 5 talks about him healing a paralyzed man on the Sabbath, cause outrage. And Jesus' response was, well, incredibly bold. He said, "My Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working."
Wow. So basically claiming equality with God in his work.
Precisely. And that just fueled the fire. But perhaps the most provocative statement was in John 8, when he declares, "Before Abraham was born, I am."
Using God's own name from the burning bush story.
Exactly. To the religious leaders, that was undeniable blasphemy, a direct threat. And you also have the political angle. His popularity was growing, raising fears of a Roman crackdown.
Ah, right. The potential for unrest.
Yes, which led the high priest Caiaphas to make that chilling argument, it is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish. It shows the political calculation involved.
So hearing all this conflict and these different reactions, it sounds like the Jewish community itself must have been really torn. It wasn't just one big no to Jesus.
No, absolutely not. That's a crucial point. It wasn't a uniform rejection at all. Many, many Jews were deeply drawn to him,
Who specifically?
especially those on the margins. Tax collectors, fishermen, lepers, the poor, people considered sinners. They found hope in his message, a sense of dignity, divine acceptance.
And the miracles.
The miracles were huge. For many, they were clear signs that the Messianic age, the age they longed for, was actually starting. These early Jewish followers, they became the bedrock of what grew into the Christian church.
So it created a split.
A profound and painful split, yes. Within families, within synagogues, you had belief and disbelief existing side by side. It was deeply divisive.
And while all this internal Jewish debate and division is happening, something else starts. Gentiles, non-Jews start embracing Jesus in large numbers. How did that happen? What was going on there?
Yeah, this is where the story takes another fascinating turn. Why Gentiles? How do they understand this?
Right.
The Apostle Paul, who was himself, a deeply committed Jew before his conversion, he addressed this directly in Romans 11. He talks about a partial hardening of Israel.
What does that mean, partial hardening?
It wasn't seen as a final rejection by God, but more like a temporary resistance. And Paul argues this actually served a divine purpose. It opened the door for Gentiles to be grafted in, as he put it.
Grafted in, like onto a tree.
Exactly. He uses this powerful image of an olive tree. Some natural branches Israel were broken off because of unbelief, but then wild olive branches Gentiles were grafted into that same tree. It signifies an extension of God's grace, not a replacement.
So inclusion, not substitution.
That's the idea. And Paul connects this back to the very beginning. God's promise to Abraham that all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. The Gentile acceptance was seen as fulfilling prophecies like Isaiah's, that the Messiah would be a light to the nations.
And what was the appeal for the Gentiles themselves? What did they see in Jesus?
Well, think about the pagan religions of the time. Often distant, impersonal gods, complex rituals. Jesus offered teachings about grace, forgiveness, and crucially, a personal relationship with God. That was radically different and deeply appealing.
Okay, so we have these two groups, Jews and Gentiles, responding differently. It seems like a lot of the ongoing divide, even now, comes down to how Judaism and Christianity read the same Hebrew scriptures, especially the prophecies about the Messiah. What are the core differences there?
That's absolutely central. Their interpretations diverge significantly. A classic example is Isaiah 53, the passage about the suffering servant.
How do Christians read that?
Christians primarily see it as a direct prophecy of Jesus, his suffering, his death, his role in redeeming humanity. A clear picture of Christ.
And the Jewish interpretation.
Many Jewish scholars, traditionally and today, interpret that passage differently. They often see the servant as representing the nation of Israel itself, suffering collectively throughout history, bearing the world's burdens, in a sense.
So the same text, two very different subjects.
Exactly. And this extends to the Messiah's nature. Christians believe Jesus wasn't just the Messiah, but God incarnate, fully divine, fully human.
Whereas Judaism
maintains a very strict, undiluted monotheism. God is one. The Messiah, when he comes, will be a great human leader, chosen by God, but unequivocally human, not divine.
Those are fundamental differences.
They are. And these opposing views on Scripture and the Messiah's identity have fueled, centuries of debate, misunderstanding, and theological tension.
So from that Christian theological viewpoint, what are the stakes involved in accepting or rejecting Jesus as the Messiah? It sounds like they see it as having major spiritual consequences.
Yes. From a Christian perspective, the implications are profound. Theology teaches that accepting Jesus is the path to salvation, to reconciliation with God.
You mean like John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Exactly that verse. And Acts 4:12, salvation is found in no one else. So from this viewpoint, rejecting Jesus means remaining separated from God.
But the story doesn't just end there with rejection, does it? You mentioned Paul's hope.
Right. The New Testament, particularly Paul, doesn't frame Jewish rejection as sort of the final word. That partial hardening we talked about, it's seen as temporary, serving God's larger purpose of bringing in the Gentiles.
And the hope is?
Paul expresses this powerful hope, this conviction really in Romans 11, that ultimately all Israel will be saved. He foresees a future spiritual turning.
Back to the olive tree image.
Precisely. The natural branches, Israel, can be grafted back in. It points to this grand, overarching, redemptive plan that includes both Jews and Gentiles. Paul insists God's gifts and his call are irrevocable.
Irrevocable, meaning God hasn't given up on Israel.
Not at all. The ultimate vision, beautifully expressed in Ephesians, is one of unity in Christ where the dividing wall between Jew and Gentile is destroyed. One new humanity. That reflects God's heart, a family drawn from every people group.
Beyond the theology, though, there's the human side, the history. Why has it been so difficult, historically and culturally, for many Jewish people to accept Jesus? What are those barriers?
That's a really important and sensitive aspect. The weight of history is immense.
How so?
Well, for many Jews, the idea of accepting Jesus is tangled up with centuries of trauma, questions of identity, survival, collective memory.
You mean persecution?
Terrible persecution, yes. Forced conversions, expulsions, inquisitions, pogroms, the Holocaust. And tragically, so much of this was done in the name of Christianity.
That creates a massive barrier.
An understandable and deep-seated one. Believing in Jesus can feel, for some, like betraying their own people, their heritage, their ancestors who suffered under those bearing the cross. Jewish identity became strongly cultural and ethnic, not just religious. Conversion could feel like abandoning that identity.
And did early Christian attitudes contribute?
Sadly, yes. Some early church leaders, unfortunately, used rhetoric that portrayed Jews as, blind or cursed for rejecting Jesus, which fueled centuries of anti-Semitic theology and actions. The emotional, cultural, and communal cost for a Jewish person to believe in Jesus, especially in close-knit communities, remains incredibly high even today.
So we have these deep theological divides, these heavy historical and cultural barriers. Yet you mentioned the source material ends on a note of hope, this vision of redemption. Can you elaborate on that final picture?
Yeah, despite all the complexity and pain, the core message that comes through is that God's ultimate plan includes both Jews and Gentiles. It's a plan of eventual unity.
So the rejection wasn't like a plan B.
The perspective presented is that it wasn't an accident or failure of the plan. It's seen as part of a larger divine mystery, something God allowed and used to open the door for Gentiles, ultimately preparing the way for a future reconciliation.
Because God's promises don't expire.
Exactly. Paul's point again, God's gifts and his call are irrevocable. This vision offers, I think, real encouragement in our divided world. It shows God's salvation isn't restricted by ethnicity or background.
It's a universal message.
It's a message for everyone, intended to break down walls and build a new family based on faith. Even something as negative as rejection gets reframed within God's larger purpose. What looks like a detour is actually part of the route towards that final unity.
Okay, so bringing this all together, for you, the listener, reflecting on this incredibly complex, often painful, but ultimately hopeful story, what's the takeaway?
I think this deep dive shows something really profound. God's plan is often much bigger than our understanding, certainly bigger than human failures or resistance. And his timing, well, it's perfect, even if it feels slow or it takes unexpected turns to us.
And that offers comfort.
I think it offers deep comfort, yes. If God could use Israel's resistance, something seemingly negative, to bring about the positive of Gentile inclusion, then maybe he could use our struggles, our past mistakes, our own missed opportunities.
He can bring good out of them.
He can work them into his good purposes in his time. It means no one is forgotten. His promises hold true. He doesn't abandon the people he has called.
That is a powerful thought to end on, that sense that, well, it's never really too late to be part of God's story.
Exactly.
Whether you feel like you've been walking with him forever or you're just starting to ask questions now, that invitation is still open. Your prayers, your seeking, it matters. Your faith can still grow. Your life, whatever stage you're at, can still reflect that deep truth. God works towards beauty and unity, even through brokenness and division. So the question for you is, what will you discover next in this unfolding story?